Shalom, sweetest friends. This piece of Torah is dedicated to my mother, as I'm going to talk about the sweetness of Torah. And I know that she holds it in the highest regard and makes it ever more sweet every day. It's important that we talk about Chaf Daled Nisan. Chaf Daled Nisan is supposedly the day that Bnei Yisrael arrived in Mara. Depends on when you hold that Kriyas Yam Suf ended. Many hold that it was on the 21st of Nisan, Kriyas Yam Suf ended. After all, we read Parshas B'Shalach on Shvi Shel Pesach, the portion of splitting of the sea. After which it says, Vayelchu Shloshes Yamim Bamidbar. They went for 3 days in the Midbar. They were in the Midbar Velo Matzah Mayim, and they didn't have water. They came to Mara, they couldn't drink water because it was bitter. And Hashem showed Moshe some kind of tree or branch, and then it turned the water into sweet water. The bitter water turned sweet. All of this happened if you assume the 3 days were immediately after Kriyas Yam Suf, starting with Chaf Aleph, and then you'd have Chaf Beis, Chaf Gimel, and Chaf Daled. But some hold it's not so mukhrach, some say like it's not so clear, and that they didn't want to leave right away, and Moshe had to force them to go. So maybe they were in Mara a little bit after Chaf Daled Nisan. Either way, it's around now, it's around the time that's before Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and as such I'm speaking about it. The aspect of Mara is apropos to Limud haTorah. What was it that they gained in Mara is the real question of the day. So there's a halacha. Halacha reads, it says, you must recite, you must publicly read the Torah 3 days a week. Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos. The Gemara in Meruba, in Baba Kama, and in the Mechilta tells us that the takana of Kriyas haTorah was based on these psukim. Vayelchu Shloshes Yamim Bamidbar Velo Matzah Mayim. Ein Mayim Ela Torah. Water is always compared to Torah. Torah is always compared to water. They were 3 days without Torah, and they felt exhausted. Not a physical exhaustion, but a sense of being malnourished and unnourished, if that's a word. Lacking a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The thirst of the neshama was making them tired. For 3 days, they had this thirst. 3 days, their neshama was longing for Torah, for a divine connection, a connection to something greater, higher, which led to the point of no water, or translated, no Torah. And that all happened when they got to Mara. After which, we were mataking. Based on this, we rectified. We said that there should never be 3 days without Torah. So, b'sheni, b'chamishi, u'b'shabbos. We read the Torah publicly so that we don't go 3 days without Torah. This is the origin of takana, Kriyas haTorah. In Yeshaya, I'll read it in English to you a little bit. Water actually stands for Torah. As it says, so hoy kol tzamei lechu mayim. Woe, all who are thirsty come for water. Having gone for 3 days without Torah, the Nevi'im, the prophets among them stepped forth and legislated the Torah should be read on the 2nd and 5th days of the week, as well as on Shabbat, so that they would not let 3 days pass without Torah. It says that right there in Baba Kama. Torah to the Jews is as vital as water is to humans. This shows us that in Mara they were given selections of Torah. Chok u'mishpat v'sham nisa'u. Rashi says, Rashi here brings that they were given mitzvot, but Rashi focuses on mitzvot as limud. Rashi's language, and it's further clarified by the Ramban on this, which is that Rashi's intent and meaning is that they were given parshios haTorah sheyitasku bahem, that they should become involved in them. The Ramban assumes that they weren't even commanded in these mitzvot yet. They were just told about them. And Rashi's language is sheyitasku bahem. The point is to be involved in the Esek haTorah. This was the legacy of Mara. Chok u'mishpat. If you find in the Mechilta, this explains a lot of other things. After Mara, they came to Elim. And in Elim, there were 12 springs and dates. It was a very different experience than Mara. For all intents and purposes, it was a spa. Compared to Mara, this was Gan Eden. So what was important there in Elim? was that the verse tells us, Vayachanu sham al hamayim. Here it's totally different than the other one. The other one was saying there wasn't any water. Here they're camping right there on the water, on the banks of the water. The Gashmias enabled them to apply themselves to Talmud Torah. They were distracted by it maybe before. Now they applied it and they used it to enhance their Talmud Torah. The point of Mara was to give them a connection. The Esek haTorah, and this explains something else. We know that they went to the Midbar Sin, where the Mun came down, and then they came to Refidim, which was the last stop before Har Sinai. And what happened? Amalek came. And then the Torah repeats. It repeats that the Jews are in Refidim, and that Amalek did battle with them in Refidim. So why would it have to mention it again? He just told us that that's where they came. So why, when Amalek attacks, it tells us that they're in Refidim. So Chazal tell us through the Mechilta that Refidim is Lashon Refu Yedehem Min haTorah. Everyone asks Torah, what Torah? Torah wasn't even given yet. So how are we to understand this? The simple explanation is clear. They were given by Mara a Torah of sorts. Something like this thing that we call an aspect of Esek haTorah. They were given mitzvos. There were so many halachos in keeping Shabbos or kibbut aveim, things like this. Even dinim were given. Mishpatim, as Rashi says. And we see they got it. They were involved. They got to Elim, and they were again involved. But yet, when they got to Refidim, they were somehow a little less involved. They slipped. Refidim, we learn, is anachronistic to mean Refu Yedehem Min haTorah. This is what made them vulnerable to Amalek. Of course, Amalek came because of other Aveirot. Chazal say that they questioned the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Amalek represents Safek, a doubt. That doubt that creeps inside our heads and is all about, is God involved in our lives or not? Refu Yedehem Min haTorah, they were not invulnerable. Another way of saying that is, they were vulnerable. There was no Shmira, because Shmira comes through Esek haTorah. There was no protection, because that comes through being involved in Torah. The tikkun for that came when they journeyed to Sinai. That got rectified. We read on Shavuot, Vayis'u me Refidim, Vayavo midbar Sinai. We know they were in Refidim. What? It's saying that they journeyed from that place. Why does it have to express it again? We know they're in Refidim. Just tell us that they went to Midbar Sinai. It's telling us that they took corrective measures of their ways, of being distracted from the mission, of being distracted from a connection with Hashem. They left all of that, and they arrived at Sinai. All of this began approximately on Chaf Daled Nisan, when they were given mitzvot, not necessarily to be in the commanded form, but rather mitzvot to be mitasek bahem, involved in them. The inyan of Mara isn't just Esek haTorah, but it's Esek haTorah to gain a sense of geschmack. We want to have a beauty, a great feeling when doing it. And for that, we have to put ourselves and make ourselves involved. It's not going to happen in a passive way. So what do you find in Mara? You find bitter water. The water was bitter. And Moshe was able to make it sweet. Some of us carry around Torah, but that Torah is bitter. It doesn't taste so good. And we need strength to become involved in Torah and make the water sweet once more. I urge you to find that in your lives. We can have vast knowledges of Torah. We can make a set Seder. But we need to find ways of applying the Torah that we have in our lives every day and walk around with the consciousness of that Torah. And not let it be just something that's reserved for the house of study or a cute vart when you go see your in-laws or something like that. Find the twig of Moshe and say, just as you made the water sweet, so you should make our dreams sweet. We're about the Talmud Torah as a mitzvah, not just a mitzvah to learn Torah. You know there's a mitzvah to eat maror too, right? But the maror is bitter. But we want Torah not to be bitter. We want Torah to be sweet. So just like, I want to emphasize, just like there's a mitzvah to eat maror, don't turn Torah into just a mitzvah to do. Make the Torah sweet. And that's the metaphor. The Torah was bitter, and then the Torah became sweet. The water was bitter. The water became sweet. In order to attain a feeling of Torah, they had to apply themselves. It doesn't happen automatically. Some of us took, a bit of a break of Torah from Torah over Pesach. We went on vacations and such, but may we all push ourselves enough to become more and more engaged in Torah and feel the geschmack that Torah has, that comes with Torah, that great, great feeling. It's all right there for the taking if we just apply ourselves. Good Shabbos.